Welcome to the Pulse Wave, brought to you by Metronome, where we build mission-critical tech to help harden our nation's land, sea, and sky, built for Earth, ready for orbit. So, like most, I didn't take a straight path to get to where I am now in my career. I was pretty much a bad student. I barely got out of high school. I dropped out of college. I spent my early 20s bouncing between hospitality jobs. And really, I was mostly slacking and having a lot of fun. But luckily, in my late 20s, sometimes around the early 2000s, I found sales and specifically recruiting. And that, for me, changed everything, changed the trajectory of my life. I had an opportunity. I got a job. So since then, I've always wondered, and really a lot lately, more than ever, how much of that, of my career and that opportunity that I got was due to the effort that I put into it, or how much of it was just sort of luck and me being in the right place at the right time. Was it timing, right? Because now it seems like that kind of break is a little fewer and further between for certain folks nowadays. College grads are sending out hundreds of resumes and maybe getting 2 or 3 interviews, if that, maybe 1. Some blame the economy. Others say it's tariffs. Maybe college is just too damn expensive. Some point to student and work visas. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is the temperature of the American job market and why it isn't working for students, why it isn't working for grads, or just folks trying to get in. So yeah, we're going to start talking about H1Bs, OPT program, STEM pipelines, outsourcing, insourcing, all the programs and the names that you know about, but just don't show up on job postings. And they definitely don't show up on rejection emails if you're lucky enough to get one. Because more and more what's being sold as this talent shortage is really ended up being a tax break for one company and a ghosted interview for your kid and my kid. And I say that as a dad. I got 3 kids. One's getting into healthcare, one loves science, and I've got a 5th grade math whiz who wants to get into the AI. So this topic, it's important. It means a lot to me. And really, at the end of the day, no matter what field they end up going into, they're all going to end up intersecting with tech, right? That's the world that we live in today. And there's no single answer. We need a lot of answers to some really big questions. So we're going to talk about some claims about we're short on talent. We need these visas, and our system would crumble without importing the best of the best engineers. And we're also going to look at the contradictions to that. There's laid off American developers, there's underemployed graduates, and there's offshore firms that are recycling resumes through revolving doors. It's all over mainstream media now, the state of the job market. The White House is talking about the visas right now, but whatever the solution is, one thing feels obvious to me, that my fellow Americans should be the preferred class at any American company that's looking to be doing hiring right now. All right, let's get to it. He's the chairman and co-founder of SkillStorm, where they accelerate careers in high-demand technologies for Americans. He is serious about his work, and he's more serious about his hair. Welcome to the show, Vincent Virga.
Yes. Did you mention I'm also your brother?
I was going to bring that up in a little bit. We just broke the 4th wall.
Yeah.
Welcome, brother.
Thank you for the kind introduction.
That's right. He can build a full stack app and a conspiracy theory in the exact same afternoon. He's an Army vet. He's the CEO and founder of Adjective. Welcome back, Rob Murtha. There you are.
It's a crazy intro, Virgil. I love it, though.
What do you expect? He's a former Blockbuster clerk turned GovCon recruiter, which means he spent his entire adult life watching people make bad selections. He's a co-founder and president of Mount Indy. Come on back, Tommy Weinert.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. All right, let's not waste any time. Everybody's busy. So let's get to segment 1 here on the greatest episode of Pulse Wave ever. Boom, sharing my screen. So, Trump's America First stance is worrying U.S. tech bosses. Chief executives are worrying about H-1B visas for foreign workers with specialist skills, which some American citizens see as a threat to their employability. But while companies navigate the volatility and reassess their supply chains in the wake of Trump's Liberation Day, chief executives in the United States are already worrying about what might come next. The H-1B program, a category of a visa that allows U.S. employers to hire foreign workers with specialist technological skills. The program is used heavily by Silicon Valley tech firms, but is also adopted by professional services, healthcare, and engineering companies. Elon Musk, the billionaire chief executive of Tesla and SpaceX, who was once in the U.S. on an H-1B visa himself. Companies are worried that Trump will change his mind and start taking away the H-1B visa program in one way or another. There are also fears that an economic recession and any rise in unemployment could fuel resentment among U.S. workers and ignite MAGA opposition to the visa, meaning that it wouldn't necessarily be the visas that is the issue. It is the fact that the economy could be worse. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, has been accused by 3 U.S. citizens of refusing to hire them, even though they were qualified because it could pay foreign workers less. They disputed that. Some 85,000 H-1B visas are allocated annually, which 65,000 are open to all candidates. 20,000 are reserved for foreign nationals with master's degrees or higher. Musk previously said that the visa scheme attracted the top 0.0% of engineering talent. Upending the program would be a gift to other nations who would be able to benefit from their skills. A reduction in H-1B visa admissions in 2017 during the first Trump administration, more higher skilled applicants ended up going to Canada because we depleted our H-1B visa program at that time. So I'm curious, if we get rid of the H-1B visa program, or if we lower the amount of people in that program, this article is saying that, it would be an issue for these big companies, and there would be a lack of talent. So Vince, I'm going to go to you first, just sort of your whole take on the issue. And as we get further on in these articles, we get a little more depth about what some of the issues could be.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I guess first, first thing I want to say is, there's obviously a lot of factors and a lot of parties involved in this, and a lot of layers to it. As far as the corporate clients that sort of end up being the end users of the talent, the Fortune 500 and big tech, they're acting in their rational self-interest, right? The law allows for it to happen. And they're going to take advantage of it. Their primary responsibility is to, increase earnings, and they have a responsibility to their stockholders, to do that. So I'm saying they're completely blameless, but certainly understand the motivations there. The irony, the idea is that if you end the program, it's going to be inflationary. And that's, I think, probably their biggest real concern. The argument that it is getting the best of the best is, worth examining. I think there's probably 3 main talking points that you hear the pro visa community sort of rely upon. One, it's only an 85,000 person cap. The second argument is it attracts the best and the brightest, and the third argument is there's a shortage of talent here. And those are all easily disputed. So H-1B is just one of the white collar visas. There's actually about, 8 or 10, maybe more. So you have the H-1Bs, you have the F1 OPT, which is actually in greater numbers. That's visas for, and we definitely want to spend some time diving into that one a little bit later. Those are for students that are coming out of college, and foreign students that are coming out of college and going into the workforce, which actually are in far greater numbers than the H-1B visa. You have TN visas from Canada. You have H-4 visas that if you're here on an H-1 visa, you can bring spouses or other family members over on an H-4 visa. If you total all those up, we bring in over 600,000 a year on white collar visas. The H1B alone is actually not capped at 85,000 because universities and other nonprofits have exemptions to that. So that usually ends up being around 130 something thousand a year just for H1Bs. So the fact that it's only 85,000, it's many, many times more than that. The second talking point that it's the best and the brightest, you total up all those 600,000 visas, about 70% of them go to junior and entry level jobs. So if they're junior and entry level jobs, these are not Stanford geniuses that we're talking about, right? These are, I'm sure very capable developers and programmers and engineers, but we have plenty of them here in America. And unfortunately, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the unemployment and underemployment numbers for new grads are, really reaching crisis levels. And then the third part of it is it's a shortage. Well, we just addressed that, right? You've got 1.8 million U.S. STEM grads right now in the country that are unemployed or can't find a job in their field. That number has gone up consistently since Congress authorized the Immigration Act back in 1990, which brought the H-1B visa into effect. You can pull up all the numbers, go to ChatGPT, look it up. Back 20 years ago, the total of unemployed and underemployed in U.S. STEM was about 13%. Today, that number is 46%. So it's more than tripled in the last 20 years. So, those three talking points, I think, are pretty easily disputed. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think the biggest culprit in all of this has just been so ingrained in corporate culture over the last 30 years that's just that they're used to doing things. There's a lot of perverse incentives in the system. Unfortunately, there's a ton of exploitation and corruption and even discrimination in the system. You can go in and Google visa lawsuits or visa discrimination. There's been several very large awards against large companies that were discriminating against American workers. So, again, that's my reaction to what you read there. I think it's a lot of, it's a lot of hyperbole meant to, keep the visa mill running, keep these people coming into the country. But unfortunately, and this is what I'm most concerned about, and what you mentioned at the beginning, this is hurting the young kids in our country. I've got 2 college-age kids, and they're in college right now, and you look at the unemployment numbers for new grads, it's worse than it's ever been, except for the pandemic. And if it keeps going like this, it's going to surpass those levels.
You put that great. It's very concerning. And I'm curious, I'm going to go to Rob first and then to Tom. So Rob, go ahead. I'm curious where your head's at right now.
So I am definitely not an expert on this topic. I definitely have opinions about it. I've even spoken to Vince about it briefly and stuff, it being an interesting element to the awesome business you have, SkillStorm. But one of the things that you didn't mention in the data set was the national security implications. And there are really interesting espionage concerns, and not only just espionage, but intellectual property. A lot of America's ability to project power comes from RIP. We are known as the most innovative country in the world by far. We're always ahead of things, right? And there's a lot of fear that information can get leaked out. And I just did some quick scraping. USCIS has a program called FDNS that is supposed to theoretically check in on programs and make sure that they have things in place. But we all know how compliance goes for anything kind of company related. It's always a box check. Everyone's chasing revenue. So that is what it is. And then, to play almost devil's advocate a little bit for that kind of statement and just this topic is I think in a lot of ways we created this crisis for ourselves. Our culture, our education systems are just not competitive at all. Even at the private school level, the rest of the world, you're not only importing cheaper prices, you're importing survivalist tenacity. And I don't know if everyone in our population has that same tenacity. We're kind of coming off of the boomer era, right? Where it was perfect America for many years, right? And we're starting to kind of dip and things are getting tight now. I don't have conversations with college kids, even STEM college kids, and see, what they're willing to trade from a comfort for revenue perspective. And that ratio just may not be the same compared to other people around the world. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse. I'm just saying the whole American system of, raw capitalism, come here, stake your flag in the ground, produce more value than the person next to you, be creative, do interesting things. We've kind of made that really hard for our own children. We've made that hard for our own population. So many people have checked out. We can spin out, I'm not going to go down rabbit holes, but like the SSRI crisis, right? Like all of these things we've done to our own population just, I think, makes us not very competitive as a population. And I have a personal goal to create personal resiliency, with students, with people. It's something I've been thinking a lot about, and I've had drive-by conversations with you about it, Virgil. But that's my take. I think a really cool approach to this is, obviously there's concerns about IP and straight up espionage, but then there's also an element of making our own population a lot more resilient from a value creation perspective. Let's find ways to do things that matter again, and become ruthlessly creative and kind of put that expectation on our school systems or whoever's supposed to be responsible for creating this culture. Over to you, Tommy.
The survivalist tenacity thing is like such a good point, right? Like in some of the business groups I'm in, I'm always shocked by how many entrepreneurs are first generation immigrants. Like it's an astounding amount that I know of. So I totally understand that idea of the survivalist tenacity and coming over with that drive. This is such an interesting topic, and it's tied into so many things. It's not only the visas, but it's also offshoring. And that's how I look at it as well. When we went remote in the DoD, which I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that at COVID. My next thought was, it's only a matter of time before we realize, why would I pay somebody in San Francisco to do this job if they're working remotely, if I can pay someone, for a quarter of the price overseas? So it's so many things wrapped in. And I'm glad Vince started with the profit motive, because again, like if there is a profit motive to this, of course you're going to lower your overhead and offshore your stuff or bring people in on visas and pay them less. So if you can untie the profit motive from the visa process, I think that's part of the issue. I don't know if you possibly could do that, but as long as there's an incentive, for businesses to shave overhead through this, they're going to find ways to do it. But I think that Vince nailed it all. I mean, all of those things are very easily debunked. But also, I feel like we went through at least a decade of where kids were not going and studying STEM. I remember hearing that all the time, that people were not doing this. They're getting liberal arts degrees. They're coming out. We don't have the people to do those jobs. So I think part of it too which has been alluded to, is the education system and what we are actually studying in this country. But I'm not a visa expert. I'm thankful that we work in the defense space and we typically don't have these issues. It's not that we don't come across these folks on a day-to-day basis, but we just can't hire them. But yeah, to say that there's not the talent here, especially as Vince pointed out, that these are, entry-level jobs, I mean, that's just absolutely ridiculous. So yeah, all great points so far.
Yeah, that's it. So as I said in the beginning, there is, as Rob mentioned, is it the school system that should be teaching individuals how to create value? Is it their parents that should be teaching them how to create value? Do they need to teach themselves how to create value? Was that luck for me? Or Vince also mentioned this, was it timing? It was post 9/11. There was money that was being spent pretty quickly in places where I happened to be at that moment. But then you also go to what Rob and Tom brought up, which is, if you know how to create value for yourself, is the market as tight as it actually feels? Does it depend on the job seeker and the skill set and the way that they're looking for a job still? I go back to that often. Vince, I'm curious your take there, because obviously I will say you have a motive here, but also the question is there also a question of the tenacity with which the individuals, Americans, might have in the job market?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think obviously there's been studies about Gen Zers and all that kind of stuff. I'll just say, since everything we just brought up is anecdotal, I'll bring up an anecdote because the data doesn't lie, right? I mean, you can look and you see, year over year, the number of underemployed STEM grads has gone up consistently. And, half of them can't find jobs in their field. So I can't imagine that half of STEM grads aren't capable of performing in a corporate environment. What we do as a company at SkillStorm, for those that aren't familiar, we're a solutions firm. What makes us a little bit different is that, everybody that we employ goes through what we call our PACE, our Performance Acceleration Center of Excellence. So we do large enterprise implementations. We do a lot of big tech modernization projects and programs for the federal government and Fortune 500. And the junior and entry level people that we bring on, they go through a intense, 12-week program, full time. We pay them as apprentices, and it's really, really difficult. And I will tell you, we don't have very much of a problem finding people. And the ones that do make it through our program, once they're deployed and working on projects for us, a lot of times they're sitting right next to, Big Four employees, and they will routinely outperform them. We have a 97% retention rate. So, from what I've seen, there are plenty of people, plenty of eager, smart, hardworking people in this country that want to work. They're just not given, not being given, the opportunity. A couple things to mention on some of the comments from, Tom and Rob. It's interesting because we all saw what unfolded with the manufacturing sector in this company in this country over the last, 40 or 50 years, right? The Rust Belt is called the Rust Belt for a reason. All the industry from those places just disappeared, and they were just left to become addicted to meth and, not a very bright future. Obviously, the Trump administration has done a lot about that with the tariffs and reinvesting in America, and we're seeing a surge in blue collar jobs now. So it's not that we didn't have the people that wanted to do the work, right? They just weren't being given the opportunity. The other thing, and you hear this a lot from people on the other side of the argument, is, well, they should just be able to compete. And if they can't compete, too bad. They're not good enough to get the job. Well, there's two things to that, right? One is, in my mind, if you're bringing over unlimited numbers of people from every corner of the globe into your country, I don't see that as capitalism. I see that as globalism, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. And the second part of that is, what did I just bring up again?
Globalism, capitalism.
No, before the
Rust Belt.
Oh, and so this is the other issue, and this is really worth talking about. And this in and of itself, if there's enough of a reason to step back and take a really hard look at what we're doing here and examine this, right? So we mentioned the OPT visa. If you're a foreign student in this country, you're here on an F1 visa. There's about 1.2, 1.3 million of them in this country right now. 100% of them will qualify for what's called an OPT visa. All you have to do is graduate and you're eligible to work in this country. For regular grads, that's a year. If you have a STEM degree and you're a foreign student and you graduate, you have the ability to work in this country for up to 3 years. There are no wage controls whatsoever. So, and by definition, right, these are all students, and so they will be going into entry-level jobs, right? 240,000 of them last year entered the workforce. So number one, right, you have to think what countries are they coming from and what are the opportunities for them back home? Well, the wages are far lower, in some cases, many times lower than what they can get in America. So they're going to be willing to work for a depressed wage to stay in this country. Number one. But here's the worst part, and this is absolutely outrageous, and the fact that we do this is mind-boggling to me. OPT visa holders pay no FICA tax whatsoever. They pay no Social Security. They pay no Medicare. So automatically, they are at a 15% pay and cost advantage to American graduates. American regular graduates, American STEM graduates are at a 15% disadvantage to these foreign workers in their own country. So again, we'll go out there and compete. That's capitalism. Well, that's not a competition. The game is rigged. It's stacked against these kids.
That's a great segue to this exact segment 2, which is loopholes, layoffs, and laptops, which talks about this OPT program that you're talking about here. So the tech industry's use of the H1B foreign workers visa, a little known process that allows student visa holders to transition into the workforce, is also being viewed by some as a way for employees to hire cheap labor. Taxes and legal loophole that allows companies taking on STEM workers under a program known as the Optional Practical Training, the OPT, to avoid paying into federal programs like Medicare and Social Security. That would be awesome, as a company, you didn't have to pay any Medicaid or Social Security, or at least allows those companies to pay less in payroll taxes than they would for U.S. citizens or legal residents, meaning your friends, your family, and your children. The OPT program allows companies to take on student visa holders for a limited term, either during their studies or after their graduation, while their F1 visa is still valid. In 2024, U.S. companies employed 109,661 people on an OPT. Amazon outpaced other employees with over 10,000, followed by the University of Cal with 3,000 and Google about 2,500. With over 200 companies making use of the program, immigration critics have warned that it's just another way to see American workers being pushed aside for cheap labor. So,
just a point of clarification there, Virg, it's at 109,000. That's just STEM OPT. You total up all OPT, including non-STEM, it was 240,000 in 2024.
Can you talk about, I know that there's several companies, and what this graph shows here, and I think you could go into something about this, or there are specific, there's companies that are, I believe they are American companies, correct? Like the Wipro, Infosys, Cognizant, you probably have heard of those. I believe this chart means that 67% of Wipro's, this American company, 67% of their employees are on one of these types of visas, meaning that only 33% of this American company have American people working for them. And then if you go down the rest of the percentages, can you talk a little bit about this, Vince?
Yeah, so these are large multinational consulting firms. These were founded in foreign countries, not founded in America, and they operate here in America. A couple of them are publicly traded in the United States. They all have tens of billions of dollars worth of market cap and tens of thousands of employees just in the United States alone. Their model is generally, they work with Fortune 500 companies who outsource large parts of their IT and tech work to them. Generally, they will go in and send a percentage of that offshore. Could be, 50%, 75%. And then the work that they do here, the model is they rely heavily on H1B visas to do the work here domestically. So in essence, this is a replacement of American workers.
Vince, are they contracted through other companies now? I'm just curious. Like when it says total workforce, is that directly with those organizations on the H1B program, or do you think they're using organizations to hire those H1Bs?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Tom. Actually, it's both. So they hire some directly. There's a vast network of much smaller companies, thousands and thousands of them, that also apply for H1B visas. Again, going back to the best and brightest, this is the funniest part of all of it. The H1B visa system is literally a lottery. It's a lottery. Right. So I don't know how you're getting the best and brightest when it's the lottery and 70% of them are entry level. But at any rate, so they get these smaller companies to, excuse me.
Yep.
They get these smaller companies to also apply for a bunch of visas. And if they're successful, a lot of times they will subcontract to these, larger consulting firms like, Wipro, Emphasis, et cetera. And there's a whole network. And when this is a difficult subject, but, a lot of times when the program is being exploited, it can be traced back to a lot of these shell companies. They've proven, and you can see cases for this. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is everybody or even the majority, but it happens more than it should, where a lot of these smaller companies that process these visas are just shell companies and ultimately owned by, a lot of times the same person. And even in some cases, there's been, fraud that's occurred where, it could be a hiring manager that's getting kickbacks. And, it is, unfortunately, this part of the industry is notorious for, those kinds of problems.
Is there a cap on how many H1B visas each company could have?
No.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, these companies are classified, I believe it's with the Department of Labor. It could be a different, it might be UCIS or whatever, I don't know. But they're classified as H1B dependent companies. I don't even know why that would be a thing, but it is.
It doesn't take a lot of Google searches to find a lot of articles like this. Well, NBC, a black hole, new graduates discover a dismal job market. CBS, more than half of college graduates are working in jobs that don't require degrees. You could argue if that's a good or a bad thing, either way. But also here, I want to get to here, Vince, you have a great series of charts here that I think call out a lot of what you're talking about and show you in actual numbers if you want to start talking through this.
Yeah, so there was a graphic that had been going around Twitter X, a few weeks ago about how the percentage of 30-year-olds who are married and own a home has plummeted since 1990. I don't know if you can expand that there, but the drastic decrease started in 1990. And, again, my question in this post was, is this correlation, causation, or coincidence? What could be causing this? Well, we did pass the Immigration Act that authorized the H1B back in 1990, which is the red line on the graph there. And you can see what that's done to the total number of foreign-born workers in the country since 1990. It's almost quadrupled. And then if you want, you can go down to the next. And so this is what I was referring to earlier, right? Again, these are STEM grads that, cannot find jobs in their field. Back in 1990, you had about, looks like, 250,000 of them. Today, that number's actually higher. It's closer to 1.8 million today. And then this is just the straight up unemployment rate, right? Is consistently on an upward trend. And it's the highest that it's ever been now for STEM grads, the highest unemployment ever.
I think that's interesting. I'm going to jump in really quick and just bring up some other facts. I mean, I think holistically as a country, we've kind of declined just from people being able to do things perspective. Suicide rates are up. Mental health, issues are surfacing and more so than they've ever been. I assumed if you overlaid this with a 1990s to 2025 graph, it would show that as well. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I think there's a ton of things that's associated with our ecosystem where things have just gotten very bad because of poor incentives, right? All the loopholes of you save 15% off the top because of some crazy they're not paying FICA taxes or whatever. That's insane. That just needs to be closed. It makes no sense. It's low ROI for everyone involved. But I think anytime we've tried to, I call it finger scaling, put our finger on the scale from a policy perspective and constrain American decentralized capitalism, we always screw something up. I mean, that's been the story for the last 50 years is we try to create policies and all these weird little walled situations that try to architect an outcome. we end up like putting ourselves in a weird spot. And right now, I think we have a population crisis that's untangling. People are getting more visceral because they are feeling the pain, and they're going to get more competitive over time. It's just going to take time. One thing we haven't brought up that I think that is going to completely railroad companies' game plan around like whether they need H1B workers or not is Gen AI. I was just watching a YouTube video. The specific video was is AI a bubble? Experts debate the future of AI with Dave, Salim, and AWG. It's this Peter Diamandis influencer dude. And one of the interesting things about this channel was just how quickly generative AI is evolving. Not the way we see it with like the interfaces with ChatGPT, but in these labs at these frontier companies getting deployed into humanoid robots and stuff. Like there is no, I think a year from now, 18 months from now, there's going to be very few humans that can outright a LLM that's generating code. And I think the leverage is actually going to change, right? Because what makes a model generate better code is context and empathy with the environment you're trying to generate for, right? And it's like foreign workers will struggle to create the appropriate prompts, even if they're good at prompting, kind of, describing what, the engineered prompt should be. If you're an American, you have the upper hand to interact with a model more intentionally to produce a better output or a more accurate output for our environment that we're building for. So I think there's a couple of things. It's like, let's close up the weird loopholes that are just low ROI for everyone. Let's get the American population like understanding what value means, and also think about our ecosystem and stop incentivizing all this garbage where we spend money on things that like, it encourages people to build things that nobody needs. I was joking with Virgil the other day, and it's like, dude, it's more, I'm more incentivized to sell crony insights to a hedge fund than I am to fix like, collapsing water infrastructure that's poisoning people. That's a crisis in our country, right? That makes no sense. It's counter logic. No one's benefiting from the hedge funds trading and making a little bit extra money, and I'm getting some of that downstream, right? Like that is like a paradigm that just sucks and is just like constantly devaluing our society and contributing to inflation and unhappiness and all these other chaotic things. I'm a big, like, it's a holistic problem type dude. And I love, and that's why maybe we can have another part 2 for this, but I would love to talk about blockchain. I think decentralization is the only way America is going to wiggle their way out of the stuff that we're in. It's going to be ruthless. It's going to be old school. It's going to feel like 18th century vibes, but it's the thing we need. And cream will rise to the top, and it's going to look different than it did in the 18th century, but I think that's what we need.
Well, you said 2 things in the same sentence. This is always one of the biggest issues, which is you said eliminate the things that have a low or no ROI for anybody, and we've got to stop incentivizing this because it's not a low ROI for everybody. There's a huge frickin' ROI for a lot of people, and that's why this stuff stays in place. Vince, go ahead.
Yeah, just, a couple comments on that. I agree 100%, right? It's a no-brainer. Why in the world would a foreign student who graduates be at a 15%? Let's just get rid of that. And you heard, this all sort of came to a head around Christmas when, Elon had made some comments about it. Vivek had made some comments about it. And, almost to a person, anybody that any government official or politician, when it was brought up, they said, well, we do want the best and brightest. And yeah, there's some problems with the H1B program. And okay, yeah, there's problems with it. We got to close up this 15% loophole. The problem is it's not happening, and these kids are paying the price. That's my concern. And, again, causation, correlation, whatever, I don't know. Yes, things have gotten a lot worse for young people in this country. They're not buying homes. They're not getting married. They're addicted to drugs. Suicide rates are up. If you don't have a job and you're buried under a mountain of student debt, life ain't so good, right? And that's where all those other downstream things happen. Mm-hmm. That's my concern over it. And I just, you can't tell me that the kids that are graduating today are, substantially less capable than they were, 20 years ago. But you bring up, a really important issue, and this has come up a couple of times, right? The education system is not blameless. They are one of the big culprits in all of this, right? Bird, you just great. Wow, what a great segment. The cost of tuition has gone up. What is that? 3 times more than general inflation in the country, 700% over the last 4 years. And, we all see how this works, right? They're forced to take unnecessary classes that don't make any sense. And especially in tech, right? If you think about these kids that are graduating with computer science degrees in these programs, and, we partner with colleges, and I see this all the time. Some of them are really good and forward thinking. Some of them aren't, right? But the incentives are misaligned because it doesn't matter to them whether these kids get jobs or not. As long as they have a tuition paying butt in the seat, they're good to go. I had a conversation, and I'm going to leave the name of the university out of this, with the dean of business school at a large university. And I think his rate of business school graduates that graduated with jobs was something just over 50%. So almost half the kids were graduating and weren't getting jobs. And we brought in all this data and showed them that even if you have a business degree and you have a cloud certificate, or if you have a cyber certificate, your chances of getting employed were much higher. And we found a way for him to be able to do this for his students for free. All he had to do was promote it. They could do it on their own time. And he wasn't interested in doing it. And his comment was, well, we don't want these kids and parents to think that, they have to do any more than we're already asking them to do. Well, obviously they have to do something more, because half of them, aren't getting jobs. So in colleges, it takes oftentimes 2 years to get something through a curriculum committee. These professors don't know cloud. They don't know AI. They're not certified in any of the technologies that are in high demand out in the field. They don't see themselves as trainers. So yes, there's a huge mismatch with the skills that these kids are getting in college and what is in demand in the real world. And that is, that's a big part of the problem. I mean, look, you want my opinion on a solution for that? I think you got to get rid of the unnecessary classes. If you want to go into STEM, it should be very, very focused on getting the foundational stuff that you need. And then there's all kinds of programs out there like SkillStorm. There's lots of other ones where you can get those job ready skills. And in our model, it's an apprenticeship. So you actually can get paid, to learn. If the kids have the foundational skills to pass our sort of entrance exam, 80% of them will go on to graduate and be qualified to perform at a very high level for us, or really, any company in the industry. We see it every day.
When I was preparing for this, in one of these articles, I didn't get to it. I didn't read all the way down that far, but one of the individuals in the article was talking about how nobody has interviews lined up. Nobody has jobs lined up that I'm graduating with, but I do. And she mentioned that she's been involved with ROTC for years, and she's going to get out and go to flight school. And she has this great career lined up into what she wants to do when she gets out. So it's interesting, right? Because then I started thinking about my daughter, who is a junior in high school and has already been taking classes since the last year that lines up for the career that she wants to have in healthcare, to be a nurse practitioner. And when we look up the stats, she's going to get a job without a doubt. She will have a career. And what you're talking, this lines up with that theory. The theory, which is you're teaching someone and giving them a real skill, and they know that it is currently applicable, and that's the avenue for them. So it makes me wonder I think we're all sort of getting to a point of what are we setting them up with? Is it success, or is it that I learned what happened in South Sudan in the early 1960s when there was an uprising? That's fun and that's awesome, but you can read that later in a book if you're interested in history. That's not going to get you a job. Hold on, Tom. I had you muted.
Unless you're going into foreign policy or something like that. But yeah, I mean, look, the whole idea of skills-based hiring is something that the country's talked about for such a long time. And I'll just relate it to government contracting. It's impossible to put in place in government contracting because of the weight that all these labor categories put on degrees. And, they look at 15 years of experience equated to, that means you're this level versus, you can work at this rate. And, skills-based hiring for corporations, for government contracting, it is absolutely the way to go. And I think what we're getting at here too is how do you get the people the skills to basically, be effective in their work? The one silver lining that I'm taking away from this entire podcast is I feel like all four of us are very different when it comes to backgrounds and thought process, but we're all talking about like the same thing, which is like improving the, future of the country, but also just these things like home ownership, the disparity of, generations. These are all like important topics that, I think at the heart, we all think the same thing of, which is this is a big change that we have to make in the country, but a lot of it comes from many, many issues like Rob was talking. It's like, this is totally multifaceted and it's ingrained in really every area of society. Virgil, I just want to point out one thing. Like, I think part of to what you said, is the younger generations, are they capable of getting a job, right? And we hear that a lot. I think part two, I'm not disagreeing with the data. The unemployment is horrible, and it is a lot harder to get a job right now. But there's so much noise out there that like everyone is hearing every single day. The whole plague of easy apply, where people actually think they're applying, they're not applying. People say these things. I applied to 1,000 jobs. I'm like, you didn't apply to 1,000 jobs. You did not apply to 1,000 jobs. So I think everyone is capable. I think it's much harder right now because of that noise too. But it's crazy times for job seekers, and you've got people out there that are kind of creating way more noise with how negative it is, and to your point, it's difficult to get a job, but a lot of it comes down to how are you approaching that entire process. So it's a crazy time to be unemployed. That's for sure.
Yeah, when it comes to these kids and everybody, right? Everybody's hearing that AI is going to take their jobs, and clearly, we've seen that, some of these entry-level jobs have already gone away, right? You're not hiring entry-level copywriters. You're not hiring entry-level graphic designers. Obviously already you've got, developers are being a hell of a lot more productive with co-pilots and things like that. So, that is one of the factors. The way that I look at it, and again, my mindset is just, we're kind of at a crisis with these kids. And let me say this too, because this is really important. For the kids that are graduating, all right, the ones that are being left behind, these are not kids that have professionals for parents that, are out there in the corporate world that can connect them with interviews and internships, right? That went to prestige universities. These are first generation college graduates. And that we're talking middle class, working class, lower class kids that didn't get into the grade schools, that had to take out those loans to get those degrees, that took a STEM degree. They weren't studying basket weaving or some, crazy, humanities discipline. That's fine too if you want to do that, I guess. But, they actually had to study and work hard, to get those degrees. Those are the ones that are being left behind, right? And that's the whole American dream, right? That was my story. I was, the first person in my family to graduate from college. It opened up a ton of doors for me, been very blessed to have that opportunity. But, that ability for upward mobility for those kids and the shot at the American dream, if they can't get a job and now they're sitting there with on average $40,000 worth of student debt. And as we know, there's plenty of them that are well in excess of $100,000. And again, that's, you total it all up. We have $1.8 trillion of unpaid student debt in this country right now.
Yeah, and football stadiums owned by those companies holding that debt. Like the fact that there's SoFi Stadium and most of their money comes from college loans, that's criminal in itself. But Rob, question. So you said, actually this is for Vince, but Rob's point of like the policy, we always muck up the policy. So if you had to guess, what was the reason to why we put the H1B program in place in the first place? And, at the time, was there a need for it? And then it's just something that got exploited. But like, what do you think the policy discussion was at that time?
Great question. So this is when I get to say that I've been doing this for 30 years. So I've been around for all of it. And I will tell you, even up until 20 years ago, I think it was probably necessary. I mean, you could not find enough people to, it was just a constant struggle to get people into jobs and get work done. And so I think it was very helpful that back then, but you have to remember the mid 90s was the advent of, really tech as we know it today, right? We went from, mainframe to client server to PCs on everybody's desktop. Then we had Y2K, then we had .com, then you had the telecom boom and all the infrastructure required. And by the way, the .com bust, I don't think necessarily was much of a .com bust as it was a telecom bust. But that's a whole other story. And then, as you go on, then you have mobile, and then you have, social media and all the other stuff, but today the industry is much more mature, and we can just look at the numbers and they tell us the story. We don't need this many foreign workers coming into the country to do these jobs now. The situation has changed. So I would agree that it was probably necessary back then to some degree, but it's just clearly not the case now. And unfortunately, again, we've got, a lot of Americans that are out of work and paying the price for that.
Yeah. Is it education is skew? Is it a lack of gumption? Is it too many visas? There's a lot of points that you throw in here to say, what could it be? There's a lot of things here, but at the end of the day, there's a way to fix these things. And like you said, Tom, if there's a bunch of folks like us who are willing to help the next generation or excited about it, hey, we can help it with our own two hands. Thank you for coming on, everybody. I appreciate it. It's a really great topic. We could do hours on this, and keep pulsing.
Thanks, Rick.
Later, guys. This is great. He just bounces.
Yeah, he does.
Wow, man.
See you guys. That was great. Thank you. All right. Take care.